You are tapped in with Caden. Look, I had to return for the so-called Super Bowl weekend of boxing, which was a massive letdown. But it wasn't only a letdown to myself and others who tuned in to see great fights from some of the biggest names in boxing. It was also a letdown to the man who footed the bill, which is Turki Al-Sheikh. Take a look at Turki Al-Sheikh. He definitely seems upset. And this was something that someone posted on X, which says, when you pay millions to do something good for boxing, just for them to take advantage of it and run the whole time, right? And basically, that's a microcosm of what happened the entire weekend, the so-called Super Bowl weekend of boxing. These fighters got in the ring and they ran. I'll dive into that a bit later, but I gave my assessment as things were happening on social media, particularly on X. If you don't follow me on X, you should follow me because I don't know how often I'm going to be doing these videos. In fact, I may be retiring for good soon. But the point is, I will always give my opinion on boxing on X, and you can follow me at Caden the Geek on X. Here's what I wrote. Um, I wrote, runners do not deserve to be paid. Turki needs to make that a part of the contract. Fatal Fury has been a track meet. Haney, Ajaba, and School came to electric slide their way to victory and not fight. This is boxing, not a defensive back drill. And personally, what I saw from Devin Haney, Ajaba, and School it was just horrible. And I'll dive into that a little bit later. But then a genius on social media says to me, go stand and trade with Bacoli then. First of all, people who say that obviously never fought before, never been in a ring, don't have any pedigree. I was an amateur boxer. I spent years of my life in a boxing gym. I'm not afraid of quote unquote trading, but I'm not asking someone to stand there and trade and go both blow for blow. I'm asking you to use your movement to set up offense. And if you're not doing that, then you're not boxing, you're running. But, anyways, what I stated in response was, I see common sense isn't common. I am a paying customer giving feedback about the product that I purchased. However, if I was a boxer being paid to fight on the biggest stage of my career, I wouldn't run and expect to win. You can't win a fight backpedaling. So, as you can see, there are people, there are always going to be stands, but stands are fan of man. They're not a fan of the sport of boxing, which I am. At the end of the day, I want the right fighter to win. I want to see exciting fights. I want to see the sport grow. And this is part of the reason why I stopped making videos. It's been the sport of boxing has become more fanboys, more gossiping. It's been less about what's taking place in the ring. And if you want the sport to grow, people outside of boxing, the casuals, they're not going to care about what the YouTube boxing community is talking about. What they care about, what's actually taking place in the ring. And what took place in the ring was horrible. What we saw, let's start with Friday. We saw Devin Haney return. Everyone is excited for Devin Haney's return. Now, you want to see how Devin Haney's going to return because in his last fight, he got dropped several times by Ryan Garcia and he looked vulnerable, and you wanted to see him return. He put on all this weight. He looked more muscular. He was supposed to do damage. And instead, what he did was he ran. He ran for 12 rounds from Ramirez, someone who Barboza beat down. He ran from him. He ran from slow, heavy-footed Ramirez. That doesn't do enough to make people excited and say, you know what, I think Devin Haney is back. You can give him the excuse that he didn't want to fumble the bag. He didn't want to take any risk because he knew that the rematch with Ryan Garcia was looming. So he just wanted to have a safe performance. But I'll give my assessment of that fight on its own individual segment. But to me, you got to think of entertainment value. Turki Al-Sheikh is paying you millions, not only for that fight, but for another fight. If you win, you want to go in and put on a spectacular performance that's going to make people want to see your next fight. What Devin Haney did, Even if Ryan Garcia would have beaten Rolly Romero, would have put the rematch in jeopardy. Of course, Rolly beat Ryan Garcia, so that saved Devin from a lot of criticism. But had Rolly not defeated Ryan Garcia, people were still going to be questioning whether or not they wanted to pay their hard-earned money to see Devin run around the ring like that. Efe Ajagba is a heavyweight fighting Martin Bakole. I understand Martin Bakole is a devastating heavy puncher for the first few rounds, because let's not forget Michael Hunter did stop Martin Bakole. It was in the later rounds when Bakole gassed out and Michael Hunter took the fight to him. If you want to tell me Efe Ajagba was moving around to tire out Bakole, fine. But at some point, why don't you take the fight to him to stop him the way Michael Hunter did? Instead, Efe Ajagba stayed on his bike. And when Bakole did have the opportunity to close the gap and get him on the ropes, he lost those exchanges. So that's not boxing. I'm going to break down boxing in a second from running in a second. Now let's get to William School. William School got in that ring, and it was an exercise in lateral movement, running, sidestepping. If that's what we're judging, if we're judging his endurance, his fitness in terms of being able to run around the ring for 12 rounds, he would have won. But that's not what boxing is about. Boxing is about being the ring general, landing clean, effective punches. And yes, you score defense, but you score defense when you're making someone miss and making them pay, when you're using defense to create offense. If you just go into the fight and strictly use defense, you don't win that way because you're not scoring points. Although the legend has it that Willie Pep went in the ring and won a fight without ever throwing a punch because his opponent was swinging wildly and just missing, and he never could land a punch on Willie Pep. So Willie Pep won with a defensive exhibition. If that's the legend, that's fine. But that was eons ago. Now, let me break down the difference between boxing and running real quick. Okay? It is okay to use your movement to avoid an attack. Meaning, for this, I'm going to use Efe Ajagba and Martin Bakole. If Efe Ajagba utilizes lateral movement to avoid a combination that Bakole is throwing, makes Bakole miss, then comes back to the center of the ring and land his own punches, he is not running. But if he is utilizing movement, going side to side, looping the ring, lapping the ring, and not throwing punches, not utilizing the movement to create his own offense, he is running. Don't get it twisted. There's 12 rounds in a fight. So some rounds, runners, they will be able to create offense off of their movement and maybe even win some. But for the most part, they are just running, and you don't win rounds that way. So, another thing, right? There are these people who say, oh, well, that's what Floyd Mayweather used to do. No, it's not. And if you think that's what Floyd Mayweather used to do, you don't know boxing. Look at punch stats. Devin Haney had a record for lowest punches thrown and punches landed throughout 12 rounds. I think he threw like 224 punches. 224 punches in 12 rounds and only landed 70. That's record low. Record low. That is a snooze fest. It is a snooze fest. That is a sparring session. You can go to any local gyms. You don't want to see that with someone who was allegedly pound for pound. How can you say that that's boxing? That's boxing. That's not boxing. It is not. And yes, Devin Haney was able to win that fight, but that's because the person he was fighting was athletically inferior, was someone who couldn't match his athleticism. He's lucky he wasn't fighting slick boxer Gordo on that night, because he had fast enough feet to catch him, and he had the ability to cut off the ring, and it would have been a completely different story for Devin Haney. But again, You utilize movement to create offense, which is something Devin Haney was able to do in spurts against Ramirez. That's why he won. The reason why Skull lost is because he couldn't do that enough in his fight. He was focused on lapping the ring, looping the ring. He's not using his movement to create offense. Again, it's okay to use movement to avoid an attack, but once you avoid that attack, you reset and you start landing your punches. If you're going to be on your bike all night, if you're going to be backpedaling all night, you have to be generating offense off of the movement. Floyd Mayweather did not do that. Floyd would stay in the pocket, make you miss in the pocket, and he would land clean punches. And at some point in the round, he would change the look by moving around, right? And he's doing that just so you don't pick up on what he's not trying to do the same thing all night. If he stayed in the pocket all night, eventually you may be able to time him. You may be able to figure out, you may be able to get a beat on him. So after he landed his points in the pocket, he started to, he'll take you for a walk around the ring, also trying to take away your gas tank. And even then, when he was taking you for that walk around the ring, when he made you miss, he made you pay. Then Floyd would give you a different look where he'd go against the ropes and give you the opportunity to open up. Now he's baiting you. He's because he's so much faster than you and quicker than you. He wants you to open up now so he can have the opportunity to counter. Then he'd get off the ropes and go back to the center of the ring and do it all over again. This is called chess. This is skill. This is him showing you I can beat you at all facets of the game. This is him not letting you get a beat on him. It's like a pitcher who's throwing a 101 mile per hour fastball. You can blow it by people, but at some point they'll time it and they'll knock it out the park. That's why you got to have a changeup. That's why you got to throw a slider. That's why you got to throw a curve. The best fighters in the game know this. What William Skull did was simply run the entire time. Where was him stopping in the middle to exchange? F.A. Ajapa, listen, I give him credit for even going the distance. I don't think he's that good of a fighter, although he has improved. I'll give him that. But you can't win running. You can't win on the back foot. You can't do it, right? And you look at Jermaine Ortiz versus Teofimo Lopez, which to me, Jermaine Ortiz did a much better job of landing punches off of his movement. He still didn't get the decision. Look at Oscar De La Hoya versus Tito Trinidad, which again, to me, Oscar De La Hoya did a much better job landing punches off of his movement. He still didn't get the decision. There's precedent in boxing that lets you know if you are going to be on the back foot like that, you are not going to win. Azari Lara versus Canelo Alvarez. And I scored that fight for Lara by 1 point. But he was on the back foot too much. So when he didn't win, I wasn't tripping. You're fighting the A side. You got to go and take that. Ike Quartey, Oscar De La Hoya. I scored that for Ike Quartey by 1 point. They gave it to Oscar. I wasn't mad about it because Ike Quartey fought his behind off. That's one of my favorite fights of all time. Ike Quartey, Oscar De La Hoya. Both guys, Ike Quartey would have won, but Oscar dropped him in the last round. A clutch knockdown. And if Ike could have stayed on his feet, he would have won. So it was no robbery to him. But again, there were rounds where, but you found out why he didn't stand his ground in the 12th. That's my point. When you stand your ground, someone hit you. But the sport is boxing at the end of the day. If you're running like the quote-unquote genius said to me on Twitter, why don't you go and trade with him? If you're running to avoid an exchange, you're losing because you're running to save yourself and you're running because you're afraid of your opponent, which means that person's the ring general. If I'm chasing you around the ring, I'm the ring general, especially if you're not if your movement isn't generating offense. If your movement is generating offense, then logically you're using your movement to set up punches. I'll give you someone who does that, Jerome Boots Ennis. Jerome Boots Ennis does that. When you see Jerome Boots Ennis moving, he isn't just lapping the ring. He's moving to get you out of position so he can land something. He's moving because he knows that you're a power puncher who needs to set your feet. So he's making sure you don't get a chance to set your feet. And once you're in the process of trying to catch him, He'll stop because he can stop on a dime, land something, then get back to moving to get you out of position again. That is boxing, not the constant looping and lapping the ring. And that's the difference between those who understand the sweet science and those who just want to act like they do, or those who fanboy. Again, it's almost like your level of knowledge in the sport is going to determine whether or not you understand the difference between boxing and running. Just like in the legal profession, the way defense attorneys try to win is they throw out a whole bunch of crap. They throw out a whole bunch of insignificant little things and hope that the jury sees it as doubt, right? But doubt is really something that makes you question whether or not the defendant committed the crime in question, right? Does it make it more or less likely that the defendant committed the crime in question? Defense attorneys will start doing stupid stuff about anything, hoping that they can catch on it and be like, well, see, if you weren't telling the truth about that, then how do we know this? It's a distraction. And real people in the legal profession who have knowledge understand the difference between a distraction and doubt. Is this something the defense attorney is doing to try to distract me from the overwhelming evidence that shows this individual is guilty? Or is this a legitimate piece of evidence that creates doubt as to whether or not this person is guilty of committing the crime? What these so-called slick boxers today do is they dance around the ring because they know there's a contingent out there who won't be able to tell the difference between good boxing and running. And what these so-called slick boxers today do is say, well, he wasn't able to touch me. He couldn't land punches on me, so I should win. No. You're right. He couldn't land punches on you, but likewise, you didn't land anything on him. The difference between Mayweather and what these guys are doing today is go look at the punch stats. Those guys fighting Mayweather landed at 20 to 15%. And Mayweather landed from 40 to 50, sometimes 60% of his punches. And he landed more punches. That's boxing. When you look at the punch stats at the end of the day and you see 224 punches thrown, 70 punches landing, you were too busy running and then you didn't throw enough punches. When you're a good boxer, when you look at them punch stats numbers, your opponent's percentage is 20 under. Let's say 25% under. Even 30% under is good, but your punch stats numbers are 40% and over. And you threw more than 224 punches. At minimum, you should throw at least 450 to 500 punches. So that's the difference. These guys this weekend were so focused on running and not getting hit and avoiding a big punch that they had no punch output. That shows you where their mind was at. And of course, the slower footed fighter is going to be spending the time trying to catch the person who's running, so they're not going to be able to land anything. But again, you talk about ring generalship. Should you be credited for going into a fight where you're paid to land punches running? So in closing, I send this message to Turki Al-Sheikh. Look, you made the attempt to save boxing. And in many ways, this video is going to be long as hell because something else just came to my mind. Like, think of Fatal Fury that took place in the UK. Eubank, Ben. That was one of the best fights of the year. That's a fight of the year candidate. And those two guys went in the ring and they left it all in the ring. Now, I'm not saying it needs to be a slugfest like that. But what I'm saying to you is that fight was exciting. That fight set off Fatal Fury, something great. You was thinking, man, this is going to be awesome. Then you saw these runners. That's why I'm saying to Turki Al-Sheikh, you got to put it in the contract that if you run more than you engage, if you don't throw a minimum amount of punches, you get deducted significantly in your pay. And in fact, if you throw under 400 punches in a fight, if it goes a certain round, you don't get paid at all. What the hell was that? That was a disgrace. What Devin Haney did was a disgrace. What Efe Ajagba did was a disgrace. And what school did was a disgrace. Now, I'm not saying that they need to go toe to toe. You can utilize movement, but you should utilize movement to avoid being hit in to set up your offense. If you loop the ring, lap the ring, and keep moving, no punch output, you are running. You are avoiding getting hit. Devin was avoiding getting hit. He was afraid to get hit. F.A. Ajapa was afraid to get hit. William Skoll was afraid to get hit. If you're afraid to get hit, do not box. And no one's saying you got to stand still and be a sitting target. No, you can utilize movement. Tio did it. Tio did it against Barboza. That's exactly what he did. And Shakur did it against Padley. We talk a lot of trash about Shakur, but Shakur did it against Padley. It can be done. There's a difference between being a boxer and being a runner, and runners are killing the sport of boxing. That is why in the UK, Eubank Ben, two guys who aren't world level, who aren't the best, just domestic fighters, could sell out an arena in the UK. And that's why even Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney and all these so-called big names in America couldn't sell out an arena, so they had to do it in the middle of Times Square and put a gimmick on it. Just because they didn't want to have embarrassing ticket sales. Because at the end of the day, in the United States of America, we are sick of seeing you runners. You are the reason why boxing is dying in America, because people pay their hard-earned money. You pay the most money to see boxing in America than you do anywhere else in the world, and they get Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr., and we get Devin Haney. That's what we get. And that's why boxing is dead in the United States of America. If we had Ben Eubank, people would be willing to pay to see fights in America. Instead, what we got is these guys who run and think that they're boxing. These guys who are afraid to get hit and think that they're boxers. I'm sick of it. Like, I'm so sick of it. That's why I don't even make videos no more. If I do come back like regularly, I'm going to be talking about something else, because this is disgusting. This should have been a beautiful weekend for boxing. Instead, it's a black eye on the sport because some people didn't show up to fight. They showed up to survive, and then they want to get paid millions for it. Anyway, I'm going to end the video here. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Please like, share, subscribe. It's Caden. I'm out. Peace.